Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction thriller TV series named The 100 Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with a nuclear war in 2052 that obliterated all human civilization. The Earth's nuclear radiation levels became unsuitable for human habitation. Fortunately, at the time of the explosion, 12 nations already possessed independent operational space stations. These space stations later merged to form the Ark space station that exists till today, which is 97 years later after the nuclear apocalypse. People seeking shelter on the Ark were told they would need to wait another 100 years before the Earth would be habitable again, which means that they would have to live in space for 4 more generations before returning to their earthly home. On this day, a juvenile delinquent, Clark, was released from prison by a guard. She thought she was going to be executed as a measure to reduce the population and ease the burden on the Ark. Desperate to escape, she tried everything she could. Her mother, Dr. Abigail, the chief medical officer, told her that she and the other 99 juvenile delinquents will be sent to the ground. She added that this is her chance to survive and her instincts will make her want to take care of others like her father. She cautioned her daughter to be careful because she can't lose her again. The guard then shot Clark with a tranquilizer dart. When she woke up, she found herself seated on an antique spaceship heading for Earth, with her close friend Wells sitting beside her. The screen displayed a video recording of the judge, Thalon, who announced that the 100 of juvenile delinquents were being sent down as guinea pigs to Mount Weather. If Earth is found to be survivable, more people from the Ark will follow. In the meantime, a handsome young man named Finn took advantage of the zero gravity to float over and flirt with Clark. Inspired by him, 2 other boys also unbuckled their seatbelts. Clark ordered them back to their seats, but before she could finish speaking, the spaceship began to plummet rapidly. Wells, whose father was the judge Thalon, hastily apologized to Clark, saying he was sorry for her father being arrested and executed. Thankfully, the spaceship landed safely, but the 2 who had unbuckled their seatbelts slammed into the railings and lost their lives. A big guy named Bellamy opened the spaceship hatch, and the blinding sunlight and fresh air hit them unexpectedly. These youths, who had been born and raised on the space station, were breathing fresh air from Earth for the first time. However, it didn't take long for Clark, map in hand and brows furrowed, to become concerned. Curious, Finn moved closer to her. Clark announced they had been dropped at the wrong mountain. The mountain over there is their true destination, Mount Weather. Back on the Ark, Dr. Abigail monitored the data displayed on the prisoners' wristbands and knew they had landed. She also discovered that 2 of the delinquents had shown no signs of life. Clark was measuring the distance to Mount Weather on the map. Wells informed her that the communication system was already damaged. At that moment, Bellamy and his sister, Octavia, along with a group of others, walked over. Clearly, Bellamy had become the de facto leader of the group here. Clark told everyone that they needed to get to Mount Weather as quickly as possible, since that's where the food supplies were. The longer they wait, the harder it will be to move on. Bellamy, however, was indifferent, saying that why she and Wells, the 2 privileged ones, didn't go scout ahead. Clark insisted that Wells, who had an injured leg, should stay behind, and she set off to scout the path with Finn, Octavia, and 2 other boys. Clark noticed the wristband on Finn's arm was full of scratches and quickly warned him not to take it off. She said the wristband was sending his vital signs to the Ark. If he took it off, they would think he was dead and thus wouldn't follow them. Hearing this, Bellamy began to hatch a plan. The scouting party set off, chatting and laughing in high spirits along the way, except for Clark, who was deeply concerned because she hadn't seen any wildlife. She worried that the radiation had made it impossible for animals to survive and that they might soon meet the same fate. Suddenly, she crouched down and signaled for everyone to be quiet. A lively deer appeared in front of them, causing them to be overjoyed, but quickly the deer turned its head, revealing a shocking mutation. It had grown 2 heads. The group was stunned by that sight. Back on the Ark, news spread that Judge Thalon had been shot. Abigail and her medical team fought to save the judge. The commander quickly identified the shooter. It was Bellamy, one of the 100 sent to Earth. He whispered to the acting judge, Kane, that he could now order a population reduction. Kane, however, insisted that the time was not right, and that if they were to take the lives of hundreds of innocent civilians, they must follow the rigid rules. At the same time, the delinquent Murphy found Wells and provoked him. It turns out many of the juvenile offenders disliked Wells because their parents had been dealt with by his judge father, Thalon. Meanwhile, Bellamy was persuading everyone to remove their wristbands. The scouting party speculated why the Ark had chosen this time to send them back to Earth. Clark revealed the truth. With the current population level, the Ark could only sustain itself for about 3 more months. Their departure might allow the Ark to last an additional month. Clark explained that her father was the first engineer to discover this problem, but the council, fearing panic, refused to make it public. As a result, her father was exiled. They approached a small river. Despite Clark's advice to Octavia not to rashly get into the water, the headstrong girl couldn't wait and jumped in to wet her body. Everyone was itching to do the same. Seeing Octavia in the water, they all began to strip down. Only the boy Jasper noticed the ripples in the river. Suddenly, a large fish charged towards Octavia. Clark led the effort to push a huge rock into the water, which startled the fish, and it quickly swam away. Jasper jumped into the river and dragged an injured Octavia to shore. Clark bandaged her wounds. By this time, it was getting dark. Wells noticed that under Bellamy's instigation, many kids had started removing their wristbands. He wanted to stop them, but was met with unanimous rejection from everyone. Meanwhile, on the Ark, Dr. Abigail noticed that the kids were starting to lose signs of life one by one. She realized something was wrong, but couldn't figure out what was happening. At this moment, Abigail, having used an overdose of plasma while treating Judge Thalon, was arrested by acting Judge Kane and locked up in the same prison where her daughter had once been. She was touched to see Clark's lifelike drawings in the cell. Late at night, Clark woke up in the silent woods, stunned by the natural beauty of the glowing flora. Finn brought her sweet river water, and they exchanged smiles, gradually developing a fondness for each other. Bellamy took the opportunity of Wells's deep sleep to approach and persuade him to take off his wristband. Seeing Wells's refusal, he ordered his followers to hold him down and forcibly remove his wristband. The next day, just before Dr. Abigail was to be executed, Judge Thalon, clutching his wound, staggered in just in time to pardon Abigail's crime. At the same time, the scouting party prepared to swing across the river using a long vine. Jasper wanted to impress Octavia and insisted on going first. After a psychological struggle, he succeeded. However, the good times did not last. Just as he excitedly picked up a Mount Weather sign from the ground and shouted, he was suddenly struck in the chest by a spear. It seemed there were others here. Thinking Jasper was dead, the group quickly fled into the forest. Suddenly, the talented boy Monty tripped over scattered black bones. Clark picked up a strange skull from among them, wondering what in the world it was. Then they heard Jasper's screams from a distance. Seeing he was still alive, everyone quickly returned to the spot, only to find that Jasper's injured body had vanished. Clearly, he had been taken away by the Earth dwellers called the Grounders, who are the Earth-born descendants of radiation-tolerant humans. Although the data showed that 23 of the 100 had already perished, Abigail on the Ark always believed there must be another explanation for the phenomenon. She was convinced that it wasn't radiation that was endangering the kids' lives. When Judge Thalon saw the screen representing his son Wells's, vital signs had turned black. He was distraught with grief and full of regret for having previously agreed to send those delinquents back to Earth. While he was consumed with self-reproach, Kane argued that the space station was on the brink of destruction and Earth was uninhabitable, saying it was time to order a reduction in their numbers. Upon hearing this, Abigail urgently told the judge to believe her, suggesting that the delinquents, including Wells, might still be alive and well. When Clark and her group returned to their camp, Finn told everyone that they had been attacked by Earth's survivors and that Jasper had been captured. Suddenly, Clark noticed that Wells's wristband was missing. Murphy said smugly that they had successfully removed 24 wristbands. Clark became truly alarmed. The Ark's life support system was failing, which was why they were sent to Earth. They needed to know if Earth was habitable again, and they also needed their help to fight against the Grounders. She said taking off the wristbands would kill all of them. But Bellamy continued to incite the others, claiming Clark was privileged and surely had something to gain by coming down to Earth. He exclaimed that the wristbands had made them prisoners. By taking them off, they were no longer prisoners, but survivors and heroes. Bellamy's passionate speech was successful, and the others responded in kind. The following day, Clark was ready to embark on a mission to rescue Jasper, considering the greater good. She tried to persuade Monty to stay behind by reminding him of his invaluable knowledge and experience gained from growing up on a farm and being recruited by the engineering department. Meanwhile, Octavia wanted to join as well, but was stopped by her brother Bellamy. However, Clark managed to challenge Bellamy and Murphy into joining the rescue team. Before departing, Bellamy instructed his sidekick to look after his sister. Along the way, Bellamy was preoccupied with figuring out how to remove Clark's wristband. Since she and Wells were the children of the medical officer and the judge, he reckoned that if both their wristbands were removed, people on the Ark might not follow, ensuring his safety. Nonetheless, Clark was adamant that the only way the Ark would believe she was dead was if she actually died. Finn, who was initially reluctant to go due to fear for his life, eventually volunteered to team up with Clark. Wells, who had always harbored feelings for Clark, looked on with a sour heart as the two of them left. While on their journey, Finn conversed about the attack at Mount Weather, speculating why the grounders waited for Jasper to cross the river before striking. He suggested that perhaps the river was a boundary, indicating that Mount Weather might be inaccessible. When they came across a stream, they were thrilled to find a water source. Finn playfully pulled Clark into the water, probing her motives by saying she was so desperate to find Jasper because she felt guilty for not being able to save her father. Clark was embarrassed by his insight and fell silent. Suddenly, she caught sight of bloodstains on the rocks by the river. They quickly approached and found Jasper's goggles on the ground. The fresh bloodstains indicated they were close to finding him. Back at the main camp, Octavia was lured into a dreamlike forest by a blue butterfly with glowing wings. The sidekick found Octavia and was equally stunned by the beauty of the scene, and amidst the picturesque setting, they couldn't help but kiss each other. Following the blood trail, the group found Jasper tied to a large tree, shirtless. Anxious to save him, Clark nearly fell into a pit full of spears, but Bellamy's quick reflexes saved her from falling. Then, a panther suddenly leaped out from the jungle, which Wells quickly shot dead, providing food for the evening. At the same time, a council meeting was being held on the Ark. Kane and two other council members insisted on reducing the population to extend their survival time. Judge Thalon was torn and chose to abstain during a voting deadlock. This was intentional to buy Dr. Abigail 10 days' time. Kane left the meeting in discontent. Later, under the guise of repairs, Abigail sought out Raven, a talented mechanic. Abigail revealed to her they sent the 100 to Earth because the Ark's life support system was on its last breath. Abigail needed to prove within 10 days that Earth was suitable for life. Otherwise, they would begin reducing the population on the Ark, resulting in the death of 320 innocent people. She asked Raven to help her fix an antique escape pod within 9 days so she could also go to Earth. Raven, eager to reunite with her beloved Finn, accepted the invitation with the sole condition that she would go to Earth with Abigail after the repairs. The rescue squad returned to the main camp at dusk, carrying Jasper and the trophy panther. Finn handed Clark a homemade ornament, which delighted Clark. More kids chose to survive by removing their wristbands and exchanging them for food with Bellamy. Meanwhile, Bellamy discovered his sidekick's romance with his sister. As punishment, he hung his sidekick from a tree, unaware that a masked grounder was lurking nearby, watching everything. Late at night, a little girl among them woke up from a nightmare. Clark, understanding the pain of being banished by one's parents, went to comfort and encourage her. The next day, Octavia sought to rekindle her hormone ship with the sidekick, but his attitude had taken a turn. Realizing the change, she went to confront her brother Bellamy. Meanwhile, cries of agony echoed from above. Clark was using a heated knife to cut away the infected part of Jasper's wound, causing him to faint from the pain. Despite various doubts from the others, Clark was unwavering. She told Octavia that she had spent her life watching her doctor mother treat the sick, and she could tell there's still hope. Octavia believed her and decided to stay by Jasper's side. It's revealed that a year earlier, Clark's father discovered a systemic failure in the Ark's system and advocated for informing everyone aboard the Ark. His wife vehemently disagreed, fearing it would cause panic and lead to their banishment. She urged him to follow the council's instructions and not act rashly, but he didn't agree, believing that the residents of the Ark had the right to know the truth. Clark overheard this conversation and was so worried for her father that she confided in her friend Wells, who promised to keep it a secret. But soon after, Clark watched helplessly as guards stormed into her home and witnessed the traumatic moment of her father being exiled into space. Turning to Clark, she discovered that the grounders had applied something with antibiotic properties to Jasper's chest wound. Wells examined it and informed her it was seaweed, which thrives in gently flowing water rich in stones and with a reddish tint rather than green. Therefore, Clark, Wells, and Finn ventured back into the forest to search for the seaweed to treat Jasper's injury. Along the way, Finn stumbled upon a car buried deep in the ground, apparently a century old. Without time for a closer examination, Clark urged them to continue on their way, as Jasper's wounds were urgent. Meanwhile, Bellamy and his crew went hunting in the forest, where an axe nearly hit the little girl. She explained that she couldn't bear Jasper's heart-wrenching screams of pain and had followed them into the forest. Bellamy handed her a knife and invited her to join the hunting party. When the trio reached the river, Wells had just pointed out the seaweed when Clark eagerly got into the water and gathered a large piece. But just then, a horn sounded, and a swarm of fat birds flew towards them. As they wondered about the noise, a huge mushroom cloud appeared on the horizon, spinning rapidly towards them. The three ran for their lives and managed to dive into the old car they had found just as the yellow fog was about to engulf them. At the same time, Bellamy and his group also encountered the yellow fog. Bellamy pulled the little girl into a cave to hide. Fortunately, the last one, the sidekick, tripped and fell. His chicken cries were quickly drowned out by the terrifying toxic gas. The little girl, who fell asleep hiding in the cave, had another nightmare. Bellamy told her that whenever she felt scared, she should grip the knife he gave her, say "begone" to her fears, and that by killing the demons in her mind, she would be able to sleep peacefully. The three women sought refuge in an abandoned car, where the inebriated Clark unleashed her resentment onto Wells, accusing him that his betrayal resulted in her father's execution. Filled with guilt, Wells countered he had made a mistake, but this only angered her more. She demanded an explanation, to which Wells admitted he couldn't give her one. Sensing the tension, Finn intervened to calm both parties, but Clark insisted she couldn't do that. Wells seemed to have his reasons and resorted to drinking silently. Meanwhile, Jasper groaned in pain from his coma, irritating Murphy, who was about to silence him for good. But the quick-acting Monty, along with Octavia, secured the door with an iron rod just in time, saving Jasper from danger. The next morning, as the poison fog began to dissipate, the trio emerged from the car. Finn sensed a possible misunderstanding between Clark and Wells and suggested to her she was being too harsh on Wells, who always stops short when her father is mentioned. He asked her if she was certain it was Wells who informed on her father and if he was the only one who knew. Clark was momentarily stunned by this revelation. Then a scream echoed from afar. It was the little girl who had found the sidekick, his body ravaged by the toxic fog and on the brink of death. The sidekick, in extreme pain, pleaded with Bellamy to end his sidekick life. Hesitant at first, the little girl handed Bellamy the knife, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Clark assessed the sidekick's injuries and indicated there was no hope. She hummed a soft melody, took the knife from Bellamy's hand, and swiftly ended the man's sidekick life. The little girl witnessed this act from a short distance. At dusk, the group returned to the base camp carrying the sidekick's body. Octavia was heartbroken at the sight of his corpse, and refusing to listen to her brother's explanations, she retreated to her room. When Bellamy learned that Murphy had previously tried to kill Jasper, he was furious and nearly came to blows with him. As soon as Clark went upstairs, she brewed a remedy from seaweed with boiling water and administered it to Jasper. She comforted Octavia, urging her not to be too saddened by the sidekick's death. She then sought out Wells, pleading for the truth. She realized it was her own mother, Dr. Abigail, who had informed the council about her father, not Wells. Clark asked why he didn't tell her the truth earlier. Wells calmly replied he didn't want her to be hurt and believed this is what friends are supposed to do. Clark was overcome with guilt, but Wells said he had already forgiven her. The misunderstanding was finally cleared, and the two friends embraced without practicing a hormone yoga, their quarrel resolved. The homemade antibiotics worked, and Jasper finally awoke, joking with his friends before falling back into a sleep. As dawn began to break, the little girl approached Wells, saying that she had found a way to stop the nightmares. Suddenly, she drew a dagger and plunged it into Wells's neck, then cut off 2 of his fingers, crying that his father killed hers. The only way to end the nightmares is to kill the demon inside her. She then hummed the same lullaby Clark had used, and just after clearing up the misunderstanding, Wells was dead, an innocent victim of a tragic mistake. Clark knelt at Wells's grave, overwhelmed by memories. She told Finn that it was her mom who informed the council about her father, but Wells chose to let her hate him to protect her. Maybe it's time her mother felt the pain of loss. In a gesture of defiance, she removed her wristband, hoping Monty could use it to try and re-establish contact with the Ark. Dr. Abigail soon discovered her daughter's screen had gone dark. She held back her tears, lying to herself that her daughter wasn't dead, just that the wristband was malfunctioning. Later, she approached Raven, urging her to speed up the repairs. Raven comforted her, suggesting that Clark might just take off her wristband like the other kids, and informed Abigail that she could fix the escape pod today if she could find a pressure regulator. The young people on Earth were busy building a fence for their camp. A boy wanted to take a break and drink some water, but Murphy insulted him by urinating behind him, infuriating the boy. Octavia and Jasper were walking in the forest when they stumbled upon Wells's severed fingers. Clark examined the knife found on the ground. It was made from metal from the transport ship, indicating that a member of the 100, not an Earth dweller, had killed Wells. She quickly noticed 2 letters on the knife, the initials of Murphy's name. Ignoring others' attempts to stop her, she confronted Murphy, who denied any wrongdoing. But his past misdeeds had already made him enemies, and with no alibi, he was defenseless. The boy he had urinated on seized the moment to rally the group to banish Murphy, and many agreed. Seeing the situation spiral out of control, Clark panicked and shouted that this was not her intention, but it was too late. Those who had been bullied by Murphy joined forces, pinned him down, gagged him, and beat him up. They even hung him from a tree, intending for Bellamy to execute him. Murphy begged for mercy, and while Bellamy had his grievances, he was swayed by the crowd's cries and kicked away the stool under Murphy. Just then, Finn arrived, attempting to intervene, but the chaos was too much. At this critical moment, the true culprit, the little girl, burdened by guilt, confessed to killing Wells. Clark quickly cut the rope and freed Murphy, but he was relentless, demanding the little girl's execution. Apart from his accomplices, no one responded. Bellamy tried to protect the little girl and urged Murphy to let her go. Murphy pretended to agree, but then launched a surprise attack, knocking Bellamy unconscious and barging into the tent with his accomplice. Luckily, Clark and Finn acted quickly, taking the little girl and running into the forest. The little girl tried to hold Clark's hand but was rejected. Although Clark intended to protect the girl, she still did not forgive her crimes. Murphy's shouting was drawing near, so the 3 of them hurriedly hid in an old car that Finn had found earlier. Meanwhile, Raven informed Abigail that she couldn't launch that day due to the lack of a pressure regulator. Abigail took a risk, trading morphine with a black market dealer to get the regulator. Clark and her companions climbed down into the car, which had plenty of space, evidently prepared by Finn for some time, even equipped with pencils and paint for Clark to draw. After the little girl fell asleep, Clark began to blame herself, thinking that if she hadn't confronted Murphy, none of this would have happened. They both understood the little girl's predicament, knowing Murphy would not let things go easily. But the little girl overheard their conversation. When Clark woke up, the little girl had already left. She quickly woke Finn to search for her. Fortunately, Bellamy found her first, but the little girl, not wanting to be a burden anymore, ignored his pleas and deliberately attracted attention to herself, ready to face her fate. Meanwhile, Abigail handed the pressure regulator she had obtained to Raven, urging her to install it quickly. Soon, her assistant informed her that Kane had arrived at the medical center, counted the morphine supply, and was now on his way to apprehend her. Abigail then realized that the black market dealer had betrayed her. Raven mentioned they had only 20 minutes left before the escape pod could be launched, but Abigail was out of time. She patted Raven on the shoulder, pleading with her to head to Earth alone. Once she found the group of kids, she must signal back, or else 300 innocent people on the Ark would die. Raven looked at her with concern, but Abigail made her relay her lover to her daughter. On Earth, Bellamy took the little girl to the edge of a cliff. Clark urged everyone to calm down and talk things through. However, Murphy suddenly grabbed her, using her as a hostage to exchange for the little girl. Clark cried out, begging the girl not to come any closer, but the little girl was determined. She didn't want to be a burden anymore, and to everyone's shock, she jumped off the cliff behind her. Bellamy was devastated, unleashing his anger on Murphy. Clark stepped in, urging him to stop, saying they couldn't decide who lives or dies, and they needed to establish rules together. She proposed to exile Murphy. Consequently, Bellamy exiled Murphy from the camp, forbidding him to return. Finn gave Murphy his knife back, advising him to use it for self-defense. Back on the Ark, Abigail was at the machine shop door, stalling Kane, who had come to seek justice. After installing the pressure regulator, Raven discovered the part was faulty. She decided to put on a spacesuit and take a risk. As Kane moved to arrest Abigail, Raven's escape pod had already detached from the Ark. Clark and her group returned to the main camp, announcing Murphy's exile, which was met with no objections. At the same time, Monty's communication attempt with the Ark had failed, and worse, it had destroyed everyone's wristbands. Finn, in despair, went into an old car, venting his frustration. Clark comforted him. In a surge of emotion, they tongue-massaged each other and became intimate. After the passion subsided, Clark told Finn she had fallen in love with him. At night, 2 people were in the dense forest under the dimming twilight, wrapped up in an intimate moment. Suddenly, they saw what appeared to be a meteor, but was actually an escape pod slicing through the night sky. Everyone at the camp had clearly seen it too and were visibly excited. However, Bellamy ordered the group to wait, despite the late hour, and set out to investigate in the morning. Octavia disagreed, arguing that people within 100 miles would have seen the object fall, and if the grounders found it first, it could mean trouble. She insisted they should depart immediately, but her brother Bellamy forbade it. Back on the Ark, Judge Thalon visited Abigail in her cell, explaining to her that due to a malfunction on the Ark, environmental indices like oxygen had rapidly decreased, leading to dizzy spells and other issues among the people. The doctors were overwhelmed. As a result, the council had given special permission for her to work outside the prison while awaiting her trial. Abigail also learned that 3 hours ago, the council unanimously passed a decree to reduce the population by 320 people to be executed in 12 hours. Abigail pleaded for them to wait for Raven's response before making such a drastic decision, but the judge did not agree. On Earth, Clark and Finn hurried back to the camp, only to find that despite Bellamy's orders for everyone to stay put, he himself had disappeared. They sensed that something was amiss and set off in the direction of the fallen escape pod. Clark surmised that Bellamy must have headed for the radio, as he had always been determined to prevent the people on the Ark from learning that they were still alive since landing. As expected, Bellamy had indeed gone alone into the forest in search of the escape pod. At this point, Octavia secretly followed him. Out of necessity, Bellamy confessed to his sister that he had previously shot Judge Thalon to protect her, agreeing to someone's deal in exchange for a one-way ticket to Earth. Octavia, unable to accept this revelation, ran off confused, and on her way back, she rolled down a hillside and fell unconscious. Kane found the judge and explained the specifics of the downsizing operation. In order to maintain public order, he planned to make the reduction look like an accident. Judge Thalon decided to entrust Kane with great responsibility, as Thalon had resolved to sacrifice himself alongside the people of Section 17. He believed Kane could adhere to principles. The Ark might need more people like him. Bellamy reached the escape pod before anyone else, finding Raven unconscious. In the end, he couldn't bring himself to harm her. He cut off Raven's calling radio and threw the device into the river. Eventually, a bloodied Raven woke up. By the time Clark arrived, Raven was stepping out of the pod, and like anyone first arriving on Earth, she was ecstatic. Upon seeing her boyfriend Finn, she didn't hesitate to kiss him using her tongue. Clark was stunned, realizing only then that those two were the actual couple. She was conflicted, facing Finn, who had risked everything to find his girlfriend on Earth. Raven told Clark that it was all because of her, that they had intended to come down together, but it was too late. The council was voting on whether to kill 300 people to save oxygen for the Ark. She ran back to the escape pod, only to find the radio had vanished. Clark quickly connected that Bellamy must be involved. Meanwhile, Abigail found Judge Thalon and opposed his decision to die with Section 17, accusing him of evading his responsibility and not doing his utmost. After speaking her mind, Abigail returned to her room and risked making public a video recorded by her husband. She informed the residents of the Ark that in 12 hours, 320 people would be sacrificed to extend the oxygen supply unless they took action. At that moment, Kane and the police burst into her room. By now, Clark and her group had also found Bellamy. Hearing his name, Raven revealed that Bellamy had shot Judge Thalon, but clarified that the judge hadn't died. Clark persuaded Bellamy that he wasn't a killer. He had acted out of necessity to protect his sister, and that was his true self. Now he had the chance to save over 300 lives. They asked where the radio was, and the group followed him to the riverbank in search of it. Finn took a moment alone with Clark to explain that he hadn't expected to see his girlfriend Raven again. Clark responded that her unwillingness to remove her wristband meant she still had hope, and she understood. They finally found the radio, but Raven was unsure if it could be repaired. Just drying the parts would take half a day, yet she came up with an idea that they didn't need to speak with the Ark. They just needed to let them know they were still alive. Outside the council, a crowd had gathered. A man sought an audience with Abigail, saying his daughter was one of her patients. He told her he had watched the video and he volunteered to go to Section 17, saying his daughter was going blind and he could be of help. With that, he turned and left. Then, one after another, volunteers came in, laid down their ID badges, and departed in silence. No one had anticipated this turn of events, and everyone was deeply moved. On Earth, the youngsters in the camp, led by Raven, were busily preparing. Raven planned to send up flares to signal to the Ark that Earth was habitable and that the 100 were still alive. She told Clark her mother still loved her, but Clark hesitated before replying. Once, that was true. On the Ark, Kane found Judge Thalon and handed him the final list of volunteers, which was much longer than the number of people planned for downsizing. The judge said the video touched people's deepest emotions and asked Kane to remember that as the new judge. He then got up, ready to head to Section 17, but Kane persuaded him to stay and reinstated him as judge. The volunteers walked into Section 17 composedly, choosing self-sacrifice for their loved ones and for the survival of many others. They calmly awaited the impending death as the judge reluctantly cut off Section 17's oxygen. But just then, the delinquents on the ground were ready and lit the flares. It was still too late. The people in Section 17 had already stopped breathing. Octavia woke up in the silent forest only to find a grounder staring at him. Abigail was depressed at the thought of all those volunteers who had sacrificed themselves for others, and so was the judges. He brought a drink to comfort Abigail, saying they had made the best choice they could. Now, they could only hope for God's forgiveness, but at that moment, they saw the flares streaking through space. At night, Bellamy couldn't find his sister anywhere in the camp, so he rallied all the able-bodied men, armed them, and lit torches, and they ventured into the forest to search for Octavia. Finn found Clark and said he cared about Raven, but he couldn't stop his feelings for her. Clark looked at Finn, unsure of what to say. Then everyone started watching the beautiful meteor shower in the sky. Clark sadly said, "That's not a meteor shower, but a funeral. Those are hundreds of bodies being sent back to Earth. It seems the people on the Ark didn't get their message." She believed the priority was to find a way to communicate with the Ark. If they didn't know Earth was habitable, more innocent lives would be sacrificed. Raven, despondent, asked how they could fix it since the transmitter was smashed. Just then, Clark remembered the refuge she and Finn had found, which might have the parts they needed. Finn looked uneasy as Clark suggested this, and it seemed Raven sensed something was off. Octavia woke up, and with her leg now stitched up, she wriggled out of the cave by the faint moonlight. Meanwhile, Bellamy and the others took a huge risk entering the territory of the Grounders in search of her. Clark took Raven to the refuge to look for the necessary parts. There, she discovered the little deer, an artwork Finn had made for her by hand. Clark tried to keep it light, saying on their first day on Earth they saw a two-headed deer. Raven remarked that Finn always had a way of finding beauty in the unexpected. Before leaving, Raven took the little deer with her. By the break of day, Bellamy and his group continued their search through the forest. One of their teammates was silently ambushed by the Grounders, his throat cut and his body thrown from a tree. Suddenly, several Grounders appeared as if from nowhere, their presence ghostly and fleeting. Now, their only option was a desperate flight. After running for a while, Bellamy stopped, exasperated with fleeing. He said the Grounders must know where Octavia is. Jasper and Finn stopped as well. In the chaos, one of their men ran into a trap, a steel fork piercing straight through his chest. A tragic end that left one teammate girl so frightened that she wet herself and fled in terror. Hearing the girl's chicken screams, Octavia looked around frantically. A Grounder suddenly grabbed her from behind and covered her chicken mouth from making chicken noises. Soon, Octavia witnessed another girl impaled through the chest by a spear. She realized this Grounder didn't mean to harm her. He had saved her life twice. No longer resisting, she let the ugly Grounder take her back to the cave. To her surprise, he had no interest in her and just locked her up, and her cries and pleas were to no avail. Another friend lost, Finn realized the Grounders were toying with them. They could have killed them all, but instead lured them here deliberately. At this point, Jasper lost his cool and shouted at the Grounders, challenging them to come and kill him. True enough, several Grounders appeared and surged towards them. At this critical moment, the sound of a foghorn came from afar. The Grounders surprisingly abandoned their pursuit and ran off. But Finn realized the toxic fog was approaching. He ushered everyone to take cover under the tarps they carried. However, the anticipated fog never arrived, and instead, they found a Grounder separated from the group. So they decided to follow quietly. Back from the shelter, Raven was sullen and lost in thought, clutching the little deer she found. She confronted Clark if Finn had made this for her. Clark, feeling wronged, replied that she couldn't help it, and she didn't even know Raven existed at that time. At that moment, the Grounder returned to the cave and crouched beside Octavia with concern, but was caught off guard when Octavia swung a chain, striking him on the head. Bellamy and the others then entered the cave and freed Octavia from her chains. Octavia, intending to protect the Grounder, urged her brother to leave quickly. However, Bellamy in rage was intent on killing him. Octavia pleaded with her brother, insisting that the grounder hadn't harmed her. Just then, Finn noticed an object on the grounder and bent down for a closer look, only to be taken by surprise when the grounder attacked him with a dagger, stabbing him in the chest. Bellamy was no match for the grounder, and just as their defeat seemed certain, Jasper knocked the grounder unconscious from behind, saving Bellamy from disaster. They hurried back to camp, where Clark looked at Finn's wound and said only her mother could save him. She encouraged Raven to fix the radio quickly to contact Dr. Abigail. Bellamy, however, couldn't understand why his sister was so protective of the grounder. Octavia told him that the grounder had saved her life, but Bellamy scoffed and corrected her, claiming that he was the one who had saved her and that the grounder had only wanted to use her as bait. He then blamed Octavia for intervening, which he believed led to Finn's injury. This sparked a fierce argument between them. In the past, Bellamy had been charged with the duty of protecting Octavia by their mother since childhood. In order to control the population, the Ark only allowed one child per family. However, their mother secretly gave birth to Octavia, who then grew up hidden beneath the floorboards. Octavia was desperate to leave and see the world beyond her door. Her chance finally came when a masquerade ball was held on the Ark. Bellamy, a security intern back then, took advantage of his position to take Octavia out to attend the ball. She saw the vast expanse of the universe for the first time, her joy beyond words. However, in the midst of the ball, when people were asked to remove their masks, she was discovered. The commander locked her up, and her mother lost her life for violating the one-child policy. A year later, the commander approached Bellamy again, offering him a gun and a seat on the transport ship to Earth for him and his sister, but only if he would kill Judge Thalon, who ended up being severely wounded. Back to the present, a storm is imminent, and Finn's life hangs by a thread, eliciting a whirlwind of emotions from Clark, while Raven attempts to make contact with the Ark through the radio in hopes of obtaining medical assistance from Dr. Abigail. Amidst her trial by the council, Abigail's medical expertise saves her from execution, but at the cost of her council seat. Suddenly, a cacophony of signals heralds the reception of Raven's transmission by the Ark, to the elation of both parties. Abigail, moved to tears by her daughter's voice, is prompted by the judge to inquire about the Hundred's welfare. Clark reveals Earth's habitability but mourns Wells' demise. Judge Thalon struggles to suppress his grief upon hearing of his son's death. Meanwhile, Abigail guides her daughter in treating Finn from the medbay of the Ark. Finn is fortunate, his pleura intact, and Raven's relief is palpable. In the camp, Bellamy's men bring a grounder from a cave, intent on extracting information to avenge their fallen comrades. Octavia pleads on the grounder's behalf, crediting him with saving her life and denying any killings, yet Bellamy remains skeptical, determined to uncover more. Former Judge Diana approaches Thalon, suggesting mismanagement in his department and offering her assistance. Just then, an assistant has simulated a diagram for the extraction of the dagger from Finn, warning that any misstep could sever an artery. Abigail instills confidence in her daughter, who braces herself to remove the dagger, but Finn awakens. She reassures him, instructs Raven to hold him down, and proceeds. An earthquake disrupts the procedure, uprooting trees and breaching the dropship's walls, knocking everyone to the ground. In the aftermath, Clark discovers the dagger successfully removed and tends to Finn's wound, only for him to develop a fever. Abigail instructs her daughter to remain vigilant and to report any complications. She desires a private conversation, which her daughter rebuffs, still harboring resentment towards her mother. On the dropship's second floor, Bellamy's interrogation of the grounder yields silence. The boy Miller discovers a metal box containing vials of liquid and a notebook. The grounder's reaction to Bellamy reaching for the notebook suggests a desire to keep its contents hidden. Inside, sketches by the grounder feature a girl, identifiable as Bellamy's sister Octavia, and the Hundred's camp, with notations for 102 and 10 stricken, signifying their losses. Shocked, Bellamy realizes they've been under surveillance since arrival. Kane, confronted with the Hundred's survival, faces profound guilt. A man claiming the loss of his wife assails him, demanding answers. The timely intervention of the judge with reinforcements promises the revelation of the truth to everyone. Finn's condition deteriorates into convulsions, foam at the mouth, and rapid breathing as the storm severs radio communication, leaving them isolated. Clark deduces Finn's symptoms as poisoning from the dagger. She confronts the grounder, demanding an antidote, but is met with silence. Handing the metal box to Clark, Bellamy questions which vial is the antidote. With no response forthcoming, Bellamy resorts to whipping the grounder with a belt, who remains stoically silent. Meanwhile, Judge Thalon had summoned all the leaders of the space station to attend a meeting. He apologized to everyone for previously hiding the truth and then announced that Earth was indeed habitable. However, the agitated man from before was not easily placated. Kane expressed his deep sorrow over the loss of his own son, which helped to calm the situation. At this point, Diana stepped forward, comforting her workers and helping to stabilize the situation. The judge then offered Diana the council seat that Abigail had vacated. In reality, this was a ploy by the man who had colluded with Diana in advance to force the judge's hand. Finn's condition was worsening by the minute, and despite the severe punishment, the grounder refused to cooperate. Seeing this, Octavia picked up the poisoned dagger from the ground and cut her own wrist. Her intuition told her that the grounder wouldn't just stand by and watch her die, so she knelt down, pointed to the vials on the ground, and finally asked for the antidote. After administering the antidote to Finn, Raven went outside to fetch water. Watching Finn unconscious, Clark was on the verge of tears when suddenly her mother's voice came through the radio again. She praised her daughter for her competence, but when she mentioned Clark's father, Clark's long-buried resentment erupted, saying that it's her mother who had reported her dad. But Wells had her believing it was his doing, in order to make her not hate her mother. Abigail on the other side was in tears. She wanted to explain to her daughter, but Clark turned off the radio in anger. Then Octavia approached the grounder and wiped his wounds, apologizing to him. Unexpectedly, the grounder grasped her hand and said, "Thank you." Octavia was surprised he understood English. Finn finally woke up, looking tenderly at Clark and praising her for the rescue. Clark called the exhausted Raven, telling her that Finn was awake and needed her. On the Ark, the Council has agreed to Diana's inclusion and has officially declared the return journey. However, there are currently more than 2,000 people on the Ark, while the transport ship can only carry 700. Meanwhile, the Ark's council members are video calling Clark, informing her that there is a space rescue station not far from the camp, which might help the 100 survive the winter. Later on, the judge advises Clark to forgive her mother, but achieving this is easier said than done. A young hitman is about to talk with his mother when suddenly the face of the commander appears on the screen. He has secured a place for the hitman's mother on the transport ship and arranged a job for her as leverage, instructing the hitman to eliminate Bellamy as soon as possible. On Bellamy's end, he's packed supplies and set off with Clark to find the rescue station. The hitman, with a dagger concealed on him, stealthily follows them. With Bellamy gone, Octavia takes the opportunity to take water and food upstairs. She carefully cleans the wounds of the grounder, who tells her his name is Lincoln, and expresses his wish to be remembered by her after his death. Raven wants to mend things with her boyfriend, so she swallows her pride and makes the first move. Finn wants to talk, but Raven avoids the subject, and they soon entangle their muscles. The hitman struggles to find an opportunity to strike. In no time, Clark and Bellamy find the rescue station, where Bellamy is overjoyed to discover a cache of guns and ammunition. Now, with upgraded weapons, they no longer need to fear the grounder's spears. He teaches Clark how to handle a gun and urges her to practice. Clark senses something is off with Bellamy, recalling how he packed a lot of supplies into his backpack, the posture of someone planning to escape. Bellamy doesn't deny it, saying the Ark is arriving soon and he has no choice. He is anxious, believing Judge Thalon won't let him off easily. He tells Clark to keep practicing shooting inside while he steps out to clear his head. At that moment, Jasper nervously approached Octavia, claiming to have seen grounders in the camp. But when Octavia checked, there were none to be found. It turned out that Jasper had eaten some spoiled nuts, causing him to hallucinate. Seizing the opportunity, Octavia pretended to be friendly and handed a pack of nuts to Miller, who was guarding the grounder, Lincoln. In the forest, Bellamy was also hallucinating. He saw the judge clutching a bleeding stomach, seeking revenge. Thalon scolded Bellamy for being cruel and for always using his sister as an excuse. He accused Bellamy of being responsible for the needless sacrifice of the 320 souls on the Ark. Crying, Bellamy protested that he didn't know this would happen. As he spoke, the 320 lost souls began to encircle him, and Bellamy ran for his life in fear. Clark was also not immune. She could no longer aim properly, and somehow she had bent her own gun. In a daze, she found herself back in prison, with her father walking up from behind. They embraced, but soon she realized that it was all a hallucination, possibly because she missed her father so much. Even knowing it was not real, she let down her guard and told her dad that she was trying hard, but it was too difficult with everyone depending on her. Her dad comforted her, saying he understood the hardship, that her mother loved her very much and she should try to forgive her. As he spoke, his voice changed. It's the hitman who had struck her on the head from behind. At this point, the camp was in complete chaos. After consuming the spoiled nuts, everyone was experiencing hallucinations to various degrees, including Miller. Octavia took advantage of the confusion, taking some men's upstairs and cutting the ropes that bound Lincoln. She helped him change into the clothes so he could run as far as possible. Before leaving, Lincoln kissed Octavia goodbye, full of reluctance. Finn was sober and saw the grounder attempting to escape but did not stop him. Instead, he signaled with his eyes for Lincoln to hurry. Bellamy, haunted by the 320 souls he had imagined, pulled out a gun and begged Thalon to grant him death. Suddenly, everything disappeared, and the hitman stood before Bellamy, firing a shot that turned out to be a blank. Bellamy reached for his own gun but found nothing. Thankfully, Clark arrived just in time, aiming her gun at the hitman, who urged Clark to put down the gun and confessed that the commander had sent him to kill Bellamy. Bellamy then revealed everything to Clark, including the commander's order to kill Judge Thalon. As the hitman shot at Clark, she dodged quickly. In that instant, Bellamy lunged at the hitman, and the two wrestled their muscles. Bellamy grabbed the empty shell casing and stabbed the hitman in the neck, causing him to stop breathing. An emotional Bellamy exclaimed that his mother always taught him to be a better person, and he felt like a monster for what he had done. Clark comforted him, saying that he saved her today and they needed him to survive there. If he wanted forgiveness, she forgave him, but he could no longer run away. He had to return with her. At dusk, Miller finally noticed that the grounder had disappeared. Amidst the panic, Bellamy and Clark returned to camp with their spoils of war. Bellamy announced to the rest of the 100 that they would begin firearms training the next day. If the grounders really came, they needed to be ready for battle. Afterwards, Bellamy draped a blanket over his sister's shoulders, saying that he's trying to seek her forgiveness and he's not going anywhere. Clark initiated a video call with Judge Thalon, arguing that Bellamy was one of them and that they couldn't have survived to this day without him. She pleaded for Bellamy's crimes to be pardoned. Bellamy told the judge it was the commander who had given him the gun and had wanted to kill him. Thus, Bellamy was granted clemency, and a smile of relief spread across his face for the first time in a long while. The commander was quickly arrested, but Diana visited with her subordinates and staged the commander's suicide using broken glass before leaving. On this day, the group on Earth celebrated Unity Day with the people from the Ark. However, Octavia took the opportunity to slip away. As the judge concluded his speech and the children stepped forward to perform, tragedy struck. A loud explosion occurred right where the judge had been standing. Kane's mother was hit by a flying piece of metal and succumbed to her injuries. After the initial shock, Kane realized it was a premeditated attack targeting the judge and the counselors. Judge Thalon survived because he had shortened his speech, but the other counselors, apart from Diana, were either dead or injured. Enraged, the judge ordered Kane to tighten the security of the dropship and to capture the culprit at all costs. A spy then reported to Diana, who decided to charge the dropship immediately in order to seize the return vessel. On Earth, Octavia followed the trail of lilies left by Lincoln and found his cave. They couldn't help but get intimate and smelly. 2 minutes later, as expected, they finished and emerged from the cave to find Finn, who had unexpectedly followed her. Finn handed back to Lincoln the knife he had previously plunged into his own chest. Inside the cave, Finn saw the foghorn and said it was Lincoln who had blown it to save their lives. Lincoln admitted it, but he was puzzled by Finn's visit. Finn suggested that if they could live in peace, there might still be hope. The dropship was due to arrive on Earth in 2 days, and they couldn't stop the newcomers from waging war against the grounders. However, if they saw that both sides were living peacefully, maybe the peace could continue. Finn wanted the leaders of both sides to negotiate to stop the bloodshed. Lincoln agreed to seek out the grounder leader. Kane on the Ark was busily preparing for the return journey while investigating the culprit behind the bombing incident. Diana came to him and said that the terrorist responsible for planting the bomb had surrendered to her. Finn hurried back to the camp and found Clark, telling her that he had arranged a meeting for her with the grounders. Clark was initially confused, but Finn continued, explaining that he had just been with the grounder they had held in the transport ship. If the Sky People and the grounders wanted to stop the killing and live in peace, they had to be bold enough to attempt it. Finn disagreed with Clark's request for backup. He believed that if they were going to talk, they should fully trust the other party. Clark agreed on the surface, but secretly told Bellamy about the plan and asked him to follow them with weapons for their protection. After everything was ready, Clark and Finn set off, with Bellamy and the other two following discreetly behind. On the Ark, Kane rushed to the prison to personally judge the bombing suspect. However, he did not expect it to be a trap. A guard knocked Kane and his assistant to the ground and locked them in the interrogation room. Several sections of the Ark had lost power, and the temperature had plummeted, threatening to freeze many to death. Thalon was frantic and ordered the engineers to lift the lockdown and evacuate the residents. He then realized that the prison section where Kane was located had also lost power. Thalon arrived just in time to rescue Kane and his assistant. They finally understood that this was a coup. It's the former Judge Diana who was diverting the power, intending to take over the returned ship. By now, Diana had already openly led her subordinates into action, announcing that those not loyal to her would be locked outside the service hatch. She hurried back to the Ark, ordering the hatch to be closed and the launch protocol to be initiated. At dawn, Finn and Clark arrived at the meeting place agreed upon with the grounders. Upon seeing his sister embracing Lincoln passionately, Bellamy finally understood how Lincoln had escaped. Soon, the grounders' leader, Anya, arrived on horseback, leading 2 subordinates as planned. Finn was surprised. They had agreed to come unarmed, but Clark was much calmer than him. Clark bravely offered her hand to the leader. However, Anya was confrontational from the start, accusing the 100 of launching incendiary bombs that flattened one of their villages and branding the 100 as invaders. She accused the Sky People of capturing the grounders and torturing them. She even claimed that the Sky People had started a war that they didn't know how to end. Back on the Ark, the spaceship had been fully charged. Thalon and his group were trying to pry open the hatch to prevent the spaceship's launch. With only 2 minutes left before launch, the bombing suspect discovered Abigail hiding on the deck. They needed a doctor, so Diana tried to persuade Abigail to return to Earth with them. However, Abigail was determined to stay and share the fate of the Ark, and suddenly raced to unlock the hatch door. Although the negotiations were not going smoothly, Clark was still trying her best to reach a consensus with the grounders. She argued that not only soldiers but also farmers, doctors, and engineers would be coming down, and they could help each other. Just as the negotiations were starting to improve, Jasper suddenly spotted the grounders' archers ambushed in the trees through his scope. In a fit of emotion, he rashly fired his gun and killed one of the archers, causing the negotiations to collapse. Sensing danger, Clark and her party, covered by Bellamy, ran back to their camp at full speed. Meanwhile, on the Ark, the standoff continued until the hatch was finally closed. Kane pulled Thalon back to the Ark, and the transport ship was launched. Finn was heartbroken, not expecting Clark to distrust him so much and to have secretly called for backup. At that moment, Clark and Bellamy saw the return transport ship in the night sky, but it was descending too quickly with no time to slow down, and it exploded in the distance, creating a huge mushroom cloud. Seeing this, Clark was devastated and collapsed to the ground. The next day, the 100 came to the crash site to investigate. Anxious, Clark searched for her mother's remains. Suddenly, Raven shouted to stop her because she saw the residual fuel from the crash. It's a liquid that can explode upon contact with open flame, making it dangerous to stay in the area. Bellamy immediately called for everyone to evacuate. As night fell, Octavia saw a lily flower inserted in a tree and felt a surge of secret joy within her. She knew it was a sign left by Lincoln, meaning he was here. Just then, someone triggered the camp's alarm wire. She ran to the forefront to check, and to her surprise, the intruder turned out to be Murphy, who had previously been captured by the grounders and had endured severe torture. Bellamy was still troubled by the little girl's death, wanting to shoot Murphy. Finn and Clark intervened to stop him. Clark got close to Murphy, and seeing his mangled fingers with nails torn off, she was convinced he wasn't lying. She pleaded on Murphy's behalf, suggesting they wait until he recovered and got information about the grounders before driving him out. Later, Clark went into a tent to try to contact Raven on the Ark via radio, but was shocked to see blood pooling in her eyes. Soon after, other members began showing similar symptoms, including coughing up blood. Clark realized this might be a contagious disease and hurried to find Murphy. He claimed that he woke up to find his cage unlocked and unguarded, so he escaped. Clark understood that the grounders had intentionally let Murphy go as part of a biological attack. She rushes back into the tent and tells Bellamy that the revenge he was worried about has arrived. This is it, and Murphy is the weapon. Clark decided to quarantine everyone who had been in contact with Murphy, starting with Octavia, who was the first to interact with him. The worried Bellamy ran to his sister's tent, but Octavia showed no sign of infection. Later, Clark secretly let Octavia slip out to find Lincoln and get an antidote. However, Lincoln revealed that there was no cure for the virus, which had a short course. Some people were naturally immune, and the grounders used this method to lessen the burden on the battlefield. Under Octavia's questioning, Lincoln disclosed that the grounders planned to attack at dawn. Octavia begged him to help her people, but Lincoln said he had already tried, but his own people now viewed him as a traitor. He wanted to take Octavia away, to cross the Eastern Sea and seek refuge with other tribes. But she couldn't bear to watch her brother and others walk into certain death. She insisted on returning to the camp to warn them, and then come back to find Lincoln so they could leave together. By now, people in the camp were dying from the virus, and the number of those infected was climbing rapidly. Everyone was panic-stricken and on the verge of losing control. Clark fired 3 shots into the sky and declared that the grounders were just waiting to see them turn on each other so they wouldn't have to lift a finger. She was exhausted and nearly fainting when Finn caught her, with Raven watching everything unfold. It was then that Octavia returned, telling everyone that there was no antidote. The grounders didn't use the virus to kill, but to reduce their casualties for their dawn assault. The crowd erupted in chaos upon hearing this. Clark looked at Finn, asking him to take those who were still healthy and leave the camp to save themselves. But Finn refused to do as instructed. Finn then shared his plan to blow up the bridge with everyone. Murphy said that on his way back from the grounders' camp, he had passed a bridge. The virus would pass quickly, and though destroying the bridge wouldn't stop the attack, it could slow the grounders down, giving more of their fighters a chance. Raven then went to the crash site of the spaceship and carefully collected enough fuel to blow up the bridge, bringing it back to camp. She demonstrated to Bellamy and Finn how to make the bomb. Finn decided to place the bomb himself, with Bellamy set to shoot. However, just then, Bellamy's nose started bleeding, and knowing he wasn't up to the task, he asked Jasper to take his place shooting. Soon, Bellamy was coughing up blood and was carried into the dropship. Octavia anxiously stayed by her brother's side, wiping his blood and promising to protect him using her skinny muscles. The siblings let go of their past grudges and stopped being angry with each other. But when Finn went to get the explosives, he discovered Raven was missing. She had secretly set out for the bridge. Frantic, Finn grabbed Jasper and they both raced to catch up with her. To make matters worse, Raven was also infected. She used her last bit of strength, staggering on with her weary body. The sound of war drums echoed. The grounders were moving through the forest toward the bridge. Finn spotted his girlfriend on the bridge not far ahead. Raven had managed to set up the bomb but collapsed from exhaustion. She instructed Jasper to get the gun ready while Finn rushed towards the bridge. Raven's vision was blurred, and with difficulty she aimed the gun at the explosives barrel. Finn finally reached her just before the grounders arrived, helping Raven down from the bridge. Jasper was so nervous that he messed up, missing shot after shot. To make matters worse, he ran out of bullets. Just when things were looking dire, Monty arrived with a gun, and encouraged by him, Jasper finally hit the explosive barrel. A massive explosion followed, sending a gray mushroom cloud into the sky. They had succeeded in their plan. Octavia came back to the cave. With tears streaming down her face, she returned the sketchbook to Lincoln because she had decided not to leave. She was going to stand with her brother and the others against the grounders. Back at the camp, the heroes were welcomed with open arms. Raven made up her mind to face her relationship with her boyfriend. She took off her necklace, gave it back to Finn, and held back her sorrow and reluctance as she ended their relationship. Unexpectedly, while Clark and Bellamy were discussing granting Murphy a pardon, Murphy took advantage of the distraction to cruelly kill the boy, who was sick and had once advocated for Murphy's banishment. 2 days passed since the bridge was blown up, and the virus was finally dissipating. The camp was returning to its usual calm, but Clark and Bellamy believed this peace was only temporary, anticipating that the grounders would return. The Ark had lost all contact, and Clark assumed her mother had died on the return ship, leaving them without any hope of rescue. Finn entered Raven's tent to apologize, but Raven wished Finn happiness. Suddenly, a fire broke out in the camp's barbecue pit. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but all the stored food was destroyed. The group had no choice but to go hunting again. Clark, Finn, and a little boy set out together. Watching Finn leave with Clark, Raven felt a pang of jealousy. She packed her bag to go out alone but was stopped by Bellamy. He praised her intelligence and creativity, and with his encouragement, Raven had the idea to create walkie-talkies to transform their solo fights into a team effort. Kane awoke on the Ark and began searching for other survivors. He quickly found the head engineer's assistant, whose arm was trapped in a door. Kane fetched an axe and managed to pry the door open and freed him. Then the two of them proceeded with flashlights through the darkness, finding more survivors along the way. Kane noticed cold air blowing from the air conditioning, a sign that someone must be in the control center. However, upon arrival, they found the passage blocked by a sealed pressure door. The assistant managed to connect to the control center's intercom, and sure enough, Judge Thalon and the engineers were inside. They had chosen to sacrifice their chance of escape to try and restore power to the mess hall. The judge instructed Kane to lead the survivors to the mess hall and to forget about them, but Kane refused to give up. The survivors all pitched in, pushing open the pressure door to the waiting passage and saving the fainting judge and engineers. Gratitude filled Thalon's heart as he looked at Kane and the others. In the forest, Clark and Finn found distinct claw marks and realized that they were the prey. The little boy had just stood up when he was struck by 2 swift arrows. Clark and Finn prepared to run but were knocked unconscious by grounders. In a daze, Clark saw the grounder leader, Anya, and her 2 subordinates. They were taken into a cave where Anya released Clark's bonds and commanded her to treat her comrade, threatening that if the patient died, she would kill Finn. Clark was nervous, but Finn believed in her. Anya revealed that her comrade was on the bridge when it was destroyed, blaming the Sky People. Hearing this, Clark and Finn felt a sense of guilt. By evening, the hunters from the camp returned, but there was no sign of Finn. Raven was extremely anxious, and Murphy stirred the pot by saying Finn had gone out with Clark, which only agitated Raven further. She went to Bellamy's tent and began to undress and throw her heavy body at him. Unable to resist the temptation, Bellamy and Raven ended up having an intimate hormone yoga session. Elsewhere, the condition of Anya's comrade took a sharp turn for the worse. After they lifted her up, they heard no air movement in her left lung. Clark deduced that fluid was compressing her lung. Despite the absence of a visible wound, the aftermath of an explosion had struck her chest. Without surgery, the girl would soon drown in her own blood. So Clark made an incision and inserted a hard tube to relieve the pressure in her chest cavity. However, Anya did not trust Clark and pushed her away. Finn tried to protect her but was knocked to the ground. At that moment, the girl developed a high fever. Clark knew she was infected and only medication could save her, but there was nothing at hand. It was imperative to give her a blood transfusion immediately, but there were no suitable tools available. Back on the Ark, the assistant discovered that the maintenance hatch had been manually sealed from their side before launch. That meant someone was in the maintenance bay at the time, and there might still be a chance of survivors. Kane urgently asked how to get there. The assistant suggested they could repair the shaft, but the head engineer said it was located right opposite the burning chamber, with no power to support the cooling system, making the temperature inside very high. Yet Kane was determined. Enduring the intense heat, he struggled through the repair shaft, and after installing the battery, the hatch opened, revealing the unconscious Abigail. On Earth, Finn finally managed to sharpen a needle. With the situation critical, he offered his arm for a blood transfusion to save Anya's comrade, but it was a step too late. The girl had stopped breathing. Anya stepped forward, cut off one of the girl's braids, and ordered her subordinates to carry the body away. She coldly commanded that Finn be taken outside for execution. Clark, crying, begged Anya not to hurt Finn, saying she had done her best, but Anya paid her no heed. The grounder guarding Clark told her that they wanted to recruit her to work for them, and also revealed that the grounders would launch a full-scale attack the next day. In a swift move, Clark distracted him, and catching him off guard, slit his throat with a scalpel. After he collapsed, she took the chance to escape. By this time, all the hunters had returned, but Clark's trio was still missing. Everyone grabbed walkie-talkies and headed into the forest to search. It wasn't long before they found the arrow-wounded boy, who informed them that Clark and Finn had been captured by the grounders. Raven was devastated, and at the same time, Monty had also lost contact. Clark ran wildly through the dark forest, only to fall into a grounder ambush and end up suspended in a tree. Thalon gathered the survivors on the Ark in the cafeteria and told everyone that in 51 hours, any life on the Ark would come to an end. He announced that food rationing would be lifted, hoping that everyone could spend the last moments of their lives in peace. Anya captured the fleeing Clark and brought her back. A hardened soldier named Tristan from the Grounders arrived at Anya's tribe, took over her troops, and conveyed their commander's orders that they would advance on the invaders' camp at dawn. At a critical moment, fires were seen in the distance. They tensely said the Reapers were coming. Tristan then instructed Anya to kill Clark and then meet him by the river. At this point, an imposing grounder wearing a skull mask picked up the chain on Clark, knocked her out, and drew a knife. In the camp, the little boy lay on a sickbed wanting water. But while Bellamy went out to fetch water, Murphy sneaked in, put a plastic bag over the boy's head, and suffocated him to death because the little boy had once advocated killing Murphy. At that moment, Jasper just happened to be coming downstairs. Murphy, now exposed, threatened Jasper with a gun and demanded the walkie-talkie. But Jasper used the walkie-talkie to send a message to Bellamy. Murphy quickly closed the hatch and threatened Bellamy over the walkie-talkie, saying if he tried to play the hero, his life was over. On Clark's side, she found herself vaguely seated on the back of a jolting horse. After dismounting, the masked man surprisingly untied her. To her amazement, Finn was not dead. The masked man turned out to be Lincoln in disguise, and to save both of their lives, Lincoln had killed his own people. The previous life-saving signal fire was also Lincoln's doing. Without delay, Lincoln immediately led Clark and Finn into the forest and beckoned them into a tunnel, saying if they went this way, they should be able to reach the camp before Tristan. At that moment, Anya caught up, screaming Lincoln's name in rage and crazily shooting arrows at him. On the Ark, Dr. Abigail was still doing her utmost to save her patient. But with the medicines exhausted, she looked at the girl in despair, thinking that she would never be able to mend the fractured relationship with her daughter, and was overcome with sorrow. Bellamy knew that Murphy wanted revenge on him, so he negotiated with Murphy. He traded himself for Jasper's safety. To rescue Bellamy, Raven and Jasper approached the ship's stern, prying loose a board to enter the old vessel. But they discovered a large quantity of flammable fuel, realizing they couldn't use firearms for an attack anymore. It's revealed that all grounders fear the Reapers, the brutal outside army of the Mountain Men, who, just like the grounders, are also descendants of those who survived the nuclear apocalypse by seeking shelter within Mount Weather. But unlike the grounders, the Mountain Men are vulnerable to the nuclear radiation due to their hiding inside caves. It's said that the Mountain Men have been harvesting grounder blood for 3 generations and kidnapped grounders in order to create Reapers, the strongest warriors. Knowing that, Lincoln concluded that Tristan would not dare to follow them into the tunnel frequently traversed by the Reapers. Lighting a torch, the 3 cautiously moved through the dark tunnel. Suddenly, they heard noise nearby. Lincoln extinguished the torch and handed to Finn his precious trophy, a notebook, instructing the 2 to run and he would draw them away. Tristan's cavalry will arrive by sunset. They must evacuate before then to survive. He also told them to find his friends on the East Coast using the map. After speaking, Lincoln bravely killed a Reaper and lured the others away. Before fleeing, the curious Clark lifted the cover on a cart and saw a gaunt, living dead person. A Reaper suddenly lunged at them, intending to play hide-and-seek with them. But in a critical moment, Finn grabbed a rock and smashed it on the Reaper's head, ending the Reaper's sick game and allowing them to escape. Elsewhere, Raven had to proceed with extreme caution since the cabin's wiring was tangled with the ignition system. A wrong move could be disastrous. Murphy forced Bellamy to put a noose around his own neck, wanting revenge by hanging Bellamy from a tree before killing him. Bellamy tried to buy time by talking to Murphy, who ordered him to stand on a box and fit the noose around his neck. Meanwhile, Raven accidentally caused a wire to spark, alerting Murphy, who fired his gun into the floor below. Bellamy tried to remove the noose, but Murphy kicked the stool away, leaving him hanging by a thread. Just then, the door finally opened, and the delinquents stormed in, quickly lowering Bellamy to safety. At that moment, Murphy found ammunition and spotted a homemade bomb. At dawn, Clark and Finn ran non-stop through the forest. Finn, looking at the blood on his hands, was at a loss. Clark comforted him that he only did what he had to do. Suddenly, an explosion erupted. They didn't have time to think and desperately ran towards the camp. It was Murphy who had used the bomb to blow a huge hole in the ship's hull and escaped. Bellamy didn't pursue him. He had decided to take a risk and search for Clark, Finn, and Monty. Jasper gave him a big hug, overwhelmed with emotion. Clark and Finn quickly returned to camp, where Finn informed everyone of the grounders' impending arrival and urged them to leave immediately. However, Bellamy argued that they should stay at the camp, believing there was no safer place. Clark disagreed with Bellamy and convinced everyone to pack up and prepare to evacuate. At that moment, Raven staggered back, having been shot in the abdomen by Murphy. Atop the Ark, Thalon was sipping his treasured whiskey, revisiting old videos of his son and Clark's childhood. It was during one of Clark's drawings that he spotted a glimmer of hope. With the Ark's blueprints in hand, he arrived at the monitoring center and shared his idea of using the thrusters, which maintain the Ark's orbit, to propel the Ark into the atmosphere. His concept was met with approval by the head engineer. Such an action would result in the Ark cracking open, and with the increasing pressure, 95% of the structure would explode during the descent. It was a gamble of risk and opportunity, but he decided to take the chance and tasked the engineer to pinpoint the 5% of the Ark that would not explode. Clark tended to Raven's bleeding wound and learned that there was a lot of rocket fuel in the ship's hull. Bellamy suggested negotiating with the Reaper, reasoning that the enemy of their enemy could be their friend. However, Clark had seen the Reaper's brutality and flatly refused his proposal. She cautioned Raven like a doctor, insisting she must not move, as the bullet had not yet been removed. She convinced Bellamy to evacuate with the group, emphasizing that the 100 needed him. Reluctantly, Bellamy left the camp he had built with his own hands. But as soon as the delinquents had entered the forest, they were attacked by hidden weapons, causing one to be killed instantly. Terrified like chickens, the rest of them scattered back to the camp. Clark realized that it's the Boy Scouts sent by the Grounders. At this point, opinions were divided. Octavia and Finn advocated for breaking out and fleeing to the Eastern Sea, while Bellamy believed they should adopt a defensive strategy and fight a decisive battle against the Grounders. In the end, they left the decision to Clark. Having missed the optimal moment to act, she pondered and eventually decided against evacuation, choosing to defend the camp and confront the Grounders. The delinquents took their positions, readying for battle. Octavia, ignoring his brother's pleas, was determined to face the enemy head-on through the tunnel. Then Clark revealed her plan to lure the enemy deeper before igniting the rocket ship, using the surrounding flames to incinerate the foes. Bellamy was particularly fond of this barbecue plan. Raven assured that, given enough time, it was technically feasible. However, her pain was intensifying, and she had lost sensation in her legs. With a heavy heart, Clark informed her that the bullet was lodged in her spine, and she was bleeding internally. Finn recalled the hemostatic agent in Lincoln's cave and decided to retrieve it for Raven. Raven begged him not to risk his life to save hers, but Finn was resolute. After saying their goodbyes, he set off on his mission. On the Ark, Kane and the head engineer were simulating a return journey plan for the survivors. However, there was a 95% chance of explosion at the various stations, and it was impossible to predict specific sites. This meant that some people on the Ark would die at these locations. Murmurs spread among the residents until Thalon encouraged them, acknowledging if they don't try, they are all going to die. All the space stations on the Ark were ready, but the remote detonation had failed. The separation mechanism had not been activated and couldn't be fixed. Someone had to stay behind for a manual launch. Kane unfastened his seatbelt, ready to volunteer, while Abigail pressed against him, insisting there must be another way. Kane, however, was determined to atone for his past mistakes and stood up resolutely. But as he was shaking hands and saying his goodbyes, the Ark launched. Thalon's voice came over the radio. It turns out he had manually launched the Ark ahead of everyone else, deciding to sacrifice himself for the hope of others. Drums of war sounded as Grounders moved through the forest like phantoms. Raven was handicapped, and Clark struggled to find the key circuits based on her instructions. Clark discovered the wire had been burned through. At a loss, Raven thought of Jasper, who was now ambushing the enemy, and realized that the Grounders were depleting their bullets. So Bellamy ordered a temporary ceasefire. In frustration, Tristan stabbed Murphy in the thigh, listening to the delinquents' conversations over the walkie-talkie. The Grounders then began their official attack. Bellamy met with a burly man who was eager to overpower a skinny girl like him. Bellamy was defenseless until Octavia arrived to rescue him, attacking the burly man from behind, ending his burly life. But she was immediately shot in the ankle with an arrow. Finn had reached Lincoln's cave, and after being briefed, Lincoln tossed him the hemostatic agent, prepared to head to the camp with him. That's when Finn noticed the Reaper portrait scattered on the ground and remembered Bellamy's words. He shared his thoughts with Lincoln that they should take advantage of the Reapers, the Grounders' enemy. At this moment, Raven passed out from pain. Jasper had to continue searching based on her previous instructions when suddenly a fireball lit up the night sky. It's the Ark that was burning on its descent. A strange sound erupted. Finn and Lincoln had attracted Reapers to play a hide-and-seek, and a melee ensued between the Reapers and the Grounders. Amidst the chaos, Finn managed to return to the camp while Lincoln found the injured Octavia and decided to take her for treatment. This time, Bellamy didn't stop him. Before leaving, he told his sister to go with Lincoln because he wanted her to live. The siblings embraced tearfully, and Lincoln quickly carried Octavia's heavy body away. After dealing with the Reapers, Tristan led the Grounders in a fierce assault on the delinquents. Clark was injected with a hemostatic agent by Raven, but there seemed to be no sign of her waking up. Now they could only rely on Jasper. Clark stepped outside the cabin, urging her fellow survivors to return as quickly as possible. However, the grounders' attack was too intense. Tristan landed punishing blows on Bellamy's face. Just as things looked dire, Finn grabbed a gun and charged at Tristan, but was quickly knocked to the ground. Urged on by Miller, Finn signaled Clark to hurry inside. But in the second before the hatch was about to close, Anya leaped in. There was a mistake with Jasper's controller connection. Just as Anya was about to attack, she was struck down by Miller from behind. Seeing this, the delinquents swarmed to take her life in vengeance, but were stopped by Clark. More and more grounders gathered around the spaceship. Jasper dismantled the controller, and in desperation, he slammed 2 wires against a magnet. Instantly, the perimeter of the spaceship turned into a giant oven. The intense heat wave struck the grounders surrounding the ship, and they had no time to dodge. It turned into a literal grounder barbecue. From the Ark's control center, Thalon called out to the various space stations, with only Abigail responding. After opening the hatch, Abigail was stunned by the beauty of Earth, a vista of greenery, dense jungles, and air that carried a hint of sweetness. She described the wonders of this place to Thalon, who was sincerely happy for everyone and relieved that his sacrifice was not in vain. He then took out his treasured whiskey and drank to the hope of an early reunion, ignoring DUI and the traffic rules. After a while, Clark opened the hatch. In front of her were numerous skeletons with gaping mouths, presumably having died in extreme agony. She tried to find Finn's whereabouts when suddenly several red smoke grenades fell from the sky. Anya muttered to herself that the grounders' greatest enemy, the mountain men, had arrived to flex their muscles, and then everyone started to faint due to the gas and possibly the fear of the mountain men's brutality. In a daze, Clark saw someone wearing a gas mask, aiming a gun at her. But when she woke up again, she found herself in a white room. She removed the IV tube and saw Monty locked in the opposite room, along with the sign, Mount Weather Quarantine Ward. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.